Morning. Okay, we are still in 2 Kings, and today the title of the message is Ulterior Motives, and I think we'll explain that as we get rolling here. But we've been kind of following the life of Jehu for a few weeks now, and Jehu was a commander of the army of Israel that actually Elisha told his servant to go and anoint king, and he made him king. And the first thing he says when he makes him king is, "Okay, now that you're king, I want you to destroy all of Ahab's house." Ahab was the most evil king that Israel ever had. And so he said, I made a promise to that guy that we were going to take out his entire lineage because of their wickedness, and you're going to be the guy to do it. So that was like his very first assignment. So for the last few weeks, I've been comparing him to John Wick because he's just been tearing everybody up. I mean, he's killed thousands and thousands of people, and I don't know what you guys think. It appears to me he likes it, I think. Don't you? I mean, he's pretty proficient at killing. So he was very faithful about carrying out this plan that God gave him, but he kind of drifted from faithful to fanatic we talked about last week. He started drifting away from God's plan, and in all his passion to look powerful and righteous and to fulfill God's command, I think he just kind of lost his way a little bit. I mean, it's what it seems like to me. I mean, he may have been carrying out God's will, but it's starting to become obvious that, his motives may not be in the right place. So this week we're going to see Jehu still doing what he does best, killing people. So he's going to keep killing people this week. But this week he's going to be wiping out all the observers of Baal worship. Okay, now this sounds terrible, but that was actually a good thing that he took out the Baal worshipers, because it was an extremely evil religion, pagan religion, very evil. Right now, remember, Baal worship came into Israel because this was Jezebel's god. That was Ahab's evil queen, his wife. It was her god, and he was henpecked, right? And he did whatever she told him to do, and he picks her up. Marries her, and she says, "Okay, I want to bring my God there." And she just insisted, so, he ended up allowing this religion in Israel, which he shouldn't have done. But this was such an evil religion that there were even times that it called for you to sacrifice your children. We're not talking, just a normal religion. This was a very wicked and evil, dark religion that had come in. So eliminating, Baal worship was a good thing. It's just that, the reasons Jehu did it, his ulterior motives may be a little off, right? So it appears that he's actually doing the will of God, but the text starts to tell on him a little bit this week, and we'll be discussing that as we move on through. But one thing I'm going to try to bring out today is believers today can end up a lot like Jehu, and I'm not talking about, slaughtering millions of people, at least I hope not, right? Believers can end up like him when we get in that spiritual rut, because we may still be doing good things. It's just why we're doing them that we have to check sometimes. Sometimes we just do things because we've become religious instead of spiritual. And it's an age-old problem. You get so ingrained in doing what you're supposed to do that it just becomes a habit, really. You're not really doing it with a heart for God anymore, and you just become, religious, right? And, religious people follow the rules, but spiritual people follow God. There's a difference. You know what I mean? Religious people like to please people. Spiritual people like to please God. And if you've been in any church for any amount of time, you've seen this. Trust me. It's just something that happens. We just get into this. We fall into this gap, and we just can't get out, where we're just becoming religious. So we're going to take a look at that this week. But we're going to jump right in. 2 Kings chapter 10, starting in verse 18. It says, "Then Jehu gathered all the people and said to them, 'Ahab served Baal a little. Jehu will serve him much.'" When you start going third person, you believe in yourself. So he comes out, and basically what he says is, you think Ahab was a fan of Baal. Jehu's a fan of Baal. I like Baal. This is what he's saying, right? Verse 19. He says, "Now summon all the prophets of Baal and his worshipers and all his priests. Let no one be missing, for I have a great sacrifice for Baal. Whoever is missing shall not live." Well, that's a pretty polite invitation. He says, but Jehu did it in cunning, so that he might destroy the worshipers of Baal. And Jehu said, "Sanctify a solemn assembly for Baal," and they proclaimed it. Then Jehu sent throughout Israel, and all the worshipers of Baal came, so that there was, listen, not a man left who did not come. He literally got everybody to show up. And when they went into the house of Baal was filled from one end to the other. He said to the one who was in charge of wardrobe, "Bring out garments for all the worshipers of Baal." So he brought out garments for him. Okay, so Jehu comes up with this plan. like I said, getting rid of Baal worship is a good thing. He comes up with a really good plan. It's really clever. I mean, it may not be on the up and up. It may not be the most honest thing, but it was a pretty clever, way of trying to get rid of Baal worship in all of Israel. So he acted like he was going to be this enthusiastic Baal worshiper. Now, if you remember, he never really came out strongly for God. He was just doing what God told him to do. You don't see him talking a lot about God or anything, so they could probably buy this a little easier because he wasn't very outspoken about the true God. So what he decides to do is just invite them all to the temple to worship. All of them. He wants everybody to come. Now notice he said, it's kind of strange, I noticed this when I was reading, he says all the prophets first. Because in Judaism and in most religions, the prophets are after the priests in importance. But in Baalism, the prophets are the most important part of that religion under Baal was the prophets. Then that's why they grouped the priests and the people together. The priests were just less important, but they were important but less important. But the basic point was he wanted everybody who was dedicated to Baal there, especially the important people. Right now, you notice he had specific garments brought to them. Now, a lot of people have talked about that for a long time, and I don't believe that they literally handed out thousands of garments. I don't think that's what happened. I mean, that would take forever, and I highly doubt they even had that in the wardrobe. I think what it was I think probably the prophets, first of all, then the priests, then the leading men of that religion. I would say that's who he was giving those robes to. And the reason is pretty simple. When his men started killing him, he wanted them to know who the important ones were so they could kill them first and they wouldn't escape. Because if you want to get rid of a religion, and I know somebody's going to just cut an excerpt from this sermon and use this against me, but if you wanted to kill off a religion, which is not right, I don't suggest you kill religions off, right? You can't really let the leaders escape. Because if you do, they'll just go somewhere else and start it back up again. So most likely, that was who he was giving those robes and stuff to that. He couldn't let them survive. Now, here's the thing, is Jehu really had no desire to worship Baal, which tells us he's probably a pretty good liar. That and the fact that he said, if you don't come, I'll kill you. I mean, both of those are probably playing in. But, he did say, listen, I know Ahab was a follower of Baal, but oh my gosh, Jehu, I'm the real worshiper of Baal. I'm going to show you a celebration like you've never seen, right? And he had no desire. I mean, this was just a trap that he planned out, a very well planned out trap. And there's no better way probably to eliminate Baalism than to eliminate every single person who follows it. Most normal people wouldn't consider that an option. Even at that time, you didn't see a lot of people going, geez, I want to get rid of them. I'll just murder every living thing. You can tell he likes to kill at this point. But it is kind of an efficient way to get rid of them. And when he asked them all to come, they actually all show up. I mean, he didn't have to chase them down to get rid of that religion. They came to him. Which makes me wonder, were they stupid? Did anybody else think that when you see this? Here's the king of Israel who destroyed Ahab and all of his house, chased him down and killed them all. Then he kills his wife. I mean, not lightly, right? He has her own people throw her out of a window. She splats, and that's the way it sounds when you read it. It splats. It talks about blood splatter and stuff, you know what I mean? And then they're like, let's just ride over. So the whole army rides their horses over. So we're talking he literally smoked them all is what happened here, right? And you would think that a Baal follower, knowing that Baal's, that religion came in with Jezebel, you'd think you'd put two and two together and go, he killed Ahab and just massacred his wife and killed all of his relatives, and they brought Baalism in, and he wants us to come worship. Don't you think you might think, this is a trap? This is a setup. He killed all of them. Why in the heck would he want to worship Baal? But so, in a way, I don't know if it was fear or just they were dumb or, they drank a lot. I mean, I don't know what it was. But they all showed up in one place. So here he is. He has everybody. I mean, the priests, he has the prophets, he has the leaders, he has the followers, he has everybody. So much so that it packed that temple. Packed it. Okay, so we're talking probably thousands of people that were there. Okay, now it's time to spring the trap. Let's look at this, 2 Kings 10:23. It says, Jehu went into the house of Baal with Jehonadab. Remember, that's the guy he met that was the zealot last week that he wanted to impress. With Jehonadab, the son of Rechab, and he said to the worshipers of Baal, search and see that there is here with you none of the servants of the Lord, but only worshipers of Baal. Okay, so he wants to make a distinction between who really isn't a worshiper of Baal. Some people probably came just because they're thinking, he's going to kill us if we don't show. So he wanted them to make sure they differentiated. Verse 24. Then they went in to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu stationed for himself 80 men outside, and he had said, the one who permits any of the men, now listen to this, any of the men whom I bring into your hands to escape shall give up his life in exchange. So this is kind of a tough charge for your soldiers. He's saying, kill them all, and if any of them escape, you die. Okay? Verse 25, then it came about, as soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, that Jehu said to the guard and to the royal officers, go in, kill them, and let none come out. I honestly think he likes killing at this point, don't you? I mean, didn't even hesitate. Oh, yeah, now that that's over, I'm going to go get a cheeseburger, go kill them all, right? Right, and said that none come out. And they, listen to this, and they killed them with the edge of the sword, and the guard and the royal officers threw them out and went to the inner room of the house of Baal. Now, a lot of people debate what that means because a lot of people have too much time on their hands. But anyway, here's what I think that means. I mean, they were saying that, people were saying they were stacking the bodies and all that. Here's what I think. I think he was killing thousands of people and the bodies were piling up, and they probably had some people dragging them out. I think that's probably what was going on there. Either way, they're slaughtering everybody in there. These soldiers are just killing everybody in there. Okay, verse 26. They brought out the sacred pillars of the house of Baal and burned them. When it says pillars there, it's not talking about the concrete pillars. It's probably talking about the Asherim, some of the wooden, like they would take, like tree trunks and fashion them into idol gods. This is probably what it's talking about there. They brought all those out and burned them. Verse 27, they also broke down the sacred pillar of Baal and broke down the house of Baal and made it, listen, a latrine to this day. Thus Jehu eradicated Baal out of Israel. Okay, so it does appear, did you notice that it does sound like that he actually did sacrifice something for Baal? Because it said after he finished the sacrifice, he told his men. So you talk about being sold out to a lie. He's like, I got them all here. I'll go ahead and sacrifice something. You know what I mean? Because it really didn't mean that much to him. He just wanted to get everybody there and deceive. So he actually did sacrifice something to Baal, but it was all just a big smokescreen. Because he had these 80 men outside. And if you want to make sure that people do what you say, most dictators, the reason a lot of their followers do what they say is not so much that they're evil, they're just as afraid of the dictator as you are. So a lot of times, a dictator controls by fear. So a lot of the atrocities you see that armies do under dictatorial leaderships, it's because they're afraid. They may not even be faithful. They're just afraid. So he goes out and tells these 80 men, listen, I want you to make sure you know who's not a Baal worshiper. Leave them alone. But if they're a Baal worshiper, I want them dead. And if even one of them escapes, you're dead. This is what he tells them. So they go in there and just start massacring these people. Can you imagine? I mean, they were probably wading through blood. All right? Doesn't that set well with your breakfast? They were probably wading through blood, tripping over bodies. I mean, just killing absolutely everything that was in sight. Okay, think about this for a second. Then, while all the bodies are laying there, they bring out all the idols, the wooden idols and stuff, and they burn them. And they bring the pillars out of the building, and they crush them, right? They start busting those into pieces. And then, this is actually kind of cool. I mean, it really is. Then, after everything's laid out and everything's trashed, he makes that a public restroom. And this is legitimately, that's the closest thing I can tell you to our wording. He basically said, from now on, there's the public restrooms. You got to dump your stuff from your caravan, you dump it there, right? You got to back your RV up and then empty the tanks, you do it there. Right? He made it into a public restroom. Look at that, verse 27. They also broke down the sacred pillar of Baal and broke down the house of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. So he makes it a public restroom, right? Now, this is actually really smart. Because under the law of Moses, and he knew the law of Moses, he wasn't stupid. Any kind of bodily excretions is considered unclean. It's just considered unclean. And so he knew by making that a latrine, making that like a public restroom, he knew according to the law, no Jew would ever want to build anything there. So he's like, how do I keep people from looking at this site as religious and maybe trying to spark this religion up again? I'll make it an outhouse. And that's what he did. And so nobody would build there, and he knew no self-respecting Jew would build there because it was a rest stop, man. I mean, this is where people went to the bathroom. Right? Now, it's also funny because if there were any holdouts, which I highly doubt it because it said all of them were there, but if there were any holdouts, can you imagine, I mean, just the mocking that would happen if they went back and tried to build on the site of an outhouse, basically a big outhouse? They would be made fun of and laughed out of there, and they would be constantly reminded that one man, like verse 28 tells us this, one man completely eradicated an entire religion. So he knew that by doing it this way, nobody would ever try to start it back up. There was just too much stacked against it. Nobody was actually going to start it back up. So I guess it stayed an outhouse. That's actually, it's pretty clever, to be honest with you. If you look at that, that's a pretty clever plan. But when you start taking a closer look at Jehu's life, and when you start studying his life and history of his life, you find that he had a lot of ulterior motives for even accepting God's challenge in the first place. Like, for instance, he always wanted to be king. Most captains in armies at that time, their aspiration was to move up the ladder. And he wanted to be king. Well, here he got his chance to be king, so when God said, I want you to get rid of Ahab and all of his followers, it's not like he was saying, oh, great, God, I want to be faithful. And, maybe there's a little bit of that. But realistically, by killing all them, who's going to challenge his kingship? Who's going to challenge his throne? If he wants to stay on top, eliminate the competition. So basically, he's like, this is a dream come true. God is making me king and telling me kill anybody that could take my throne? So realistically, when he was doing all this and taking all these, bringing judgment on the house of Ahab, it was profiting him in a big, big way. And that was a lot of his motivation. It was really, because you notice it never really talks about his faith in here, about how much he loved God. That never is brought up, not even once. Because that wasn't his motive. This was profiting him. Another reason he did it was getting rid of Baal would ensure that if there was anybody still faithful to Ahab, that they would know at that point, okay, this is over. He's killed his entire family. Now he wiped out his religion. I'm just getting the heck out of here. He knew that would intimidate them and just push them out. Because a lot of times followers will come back and try to build something up, or family of followers. Well, he took care of all that, so that's not an issue. Any loyalists were going to be gone. Right? Think about it. If you were a loyalist and that did make you mad, but they just massacred thousands of people and tore down your temple and made it into a public restroom, I think that'd be enough to make me leave town. What do you think? I would think that maybe the natives are hostile to me and I would leave. Right? So it was pretty clever, but he did have ulterior motives. This was setting him up and keeping him in power and making him more and more wealthy. Now, as we start to move throughout the rest of this chapter, it starts to reveal a lot more about him. So let's jump into verse 29. It says, however, as for the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel sin, from these Jehu did not depart, even the golden calves that were at Bethel and that were at Dan. The Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in executing what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. So, this gets confusing because you're going, okay, why is God blessing him? Well, God always keeps his promises. I don't know if you're aware of that. He's going to keep his promises no matter what. And his promise was, I'll bless you if you eliminate the house. And he did eliminate that house. Now, notice God didn't say, nothing bad will befall you. He didn't say, I saw the stuff you did I didn't ask you to do, and I'm going to let you get away with that. He didn't say any of that. He said, no, I did give you a promise. And you will have a dynasty that's going to reign for 4 generations. And he did have that, right? He kept his word. He said, you can have this generation. But you could tell that Jehu's heart wasn't completely right with God because he took out Baalism, but he didn't take out Jeroboam's religion. If this was really about God, he would have said, all the rest of you pagan religions are gone too. Why would he stop with just one? Well, this is where it starts to reveal that, removing Jeroboam's religion wouldn't profit him anything. What would that do for him? Jeroboam's religion had no claim to the throne. They weren't going to try to overthrow him. He's like, I don't care. Worship however you want. I just stay out of my way. So he doesn't actually get rid of all the pagan religions. He stops short of doing everything he should have done if he were legitimately doing this on behalf of God, which he wasn't, right? But he did get that one promise. Now, Jehu reigned 28 years. And he had several sons that reigned. One of them reigned for over 40 years. So God did keep his promise. It was an impressive, as far as the length of lasting the term, it was an impressive dynasty. But like I said, it starts revealing his heart a little bit more, and you see God has to take more action. So if you look at verse 32, it says, "But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord." So what's that saying? It's saying he was not following God. Okay, he did everything he asked, but he wasn't following God. It said, "But Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin. In those days, the Lord began to cut off portions from Israel, and Hazael defeated them throughout the territory of Israel, from Jordan eastward, all of Gilead, and the Gadites, and the Reubenites, and the Massonites, from Eror, which is by the valley of Arnon, even Gilead and Bashan." Okay, so despite everything God had done through him, you would think that, literally at this point, he looked unbeatable. But I think he actually thought he was unbeatable because he was awesome. That's what I think he was actually thinking. He was unbeatable because God was with him. He was taking out armies. He was taking out kings. He was walking into towns and just challenging people, having queens thrown out of windows and trampling with horses. He was getting away with everything, right? And I think he kind of believed his own hype a little bit. And despite everything that God had done for him, he goes for a pagan religion. He actually gets involved in this cult that Jeroboam started, right? And just to make you understand, Jeroboam's cult, his temples, he had he had 2 different temples Jeroboam built, and he built those to rival the worship of the true God in Jerusalem. That's why he built those. He didn't want people traveling between kingdoms because he was afraid they would leave his kingdom and stay gone. So he built these 2 temples in order to kind of rival what was going on in Jerusalem and hopefully get people to not go. He'd say, "Listen, you can worship Yahweh here," is what he would say, right? Because what happens if you look at the history of Jeroboam's temple was he had these golden calves, a lot like Aaron. Remember when back in Exodus, Moses is up on the mountain getting words from God, and the people get restless, so Aaron makes golden calves so they'll have something to worship. And when Moses comes back down, in my version, he says, "What the heck are you doing? I was on the mountain for a few weeks, and you've built idols?" And Aaron lies totally. Aaron goes, "Oh, it's the weirdest thing. We just threw all this gold in, and boom, out came cows." Talk about busted, right? But it's very similar. This religion that Jeroboam, kind of pushed is very similar to Aaron's religion, right? And here's the thing you'll find out about the devil. The devil is a master counterfeiter. Everything God does and offers, the enemy tries to build something close and offer it. You know what I mean? And so this was the enemy's way of getting the people of Jerusalem saying, "Hey, you can still worship God. These calves, I know they look like idols to you." Because they are, but I know they look like idols to you. But they just represent this invisible God above. That's what this religion taught. See, the Canaanites had a religion which they identified as the invisible God above, where they worshiped the invisible God above. Okay, and so what Jeroboam did, what his priests did, was they built these calves, and they said, these calves represent that invisible God above, which would pull all the pagans in. And then to all the people from the Jewish faith, he would say, "And the God above that's invisible is Yahweh." You see what he did there? He gave just enough of the Jerusalem faith in there to maybe keep them from traveling, and just enough of the paganism to keep the pagans coming. So this was a hybrid pagan Judeo religion, right? So that was his plan. But God was not happy with it. God didn't like the whole thing. God didn't like any kind of paganism. He didn't like graven images, right? But if you look up the historical evidence, you'll see that this is really what that religion was. It was a way of trying to get the Canaanites and the people of the Jewish people to come together and worship and find some common ground. That's basically what it was. And Jehu just jumps in head first and gets involved in this. And he starts walking in the ways of Jeroboam, which God had, destroyed Jeroboam for these things, right? So here's what happened is God said, "I will give you this reign for 4 generations." But he started taking a piece of his kingdom away. The Assyrians started coming in and fighting against Jehu, and something started happening to Jehu that had never happened before. He started losing battles. Remember how everybody looked at him as John Wick? Yeah, that was going away. He was starting to look more like an old Kevin Costner or something, right? Tough sounding, just can't finish the deal, right? And so all of a sudden he starts losing. And they start stealing Israel's land. So God said, hey, I told you you'd have 4 generations. I didn't say what kind of kingdom you'd have to reign in, you know. And so the Assyrians start taking, really important areas of Israel and making it their own property. And the biggest thing they took from, which kind of blows me away that they didn't defend this better, was they lost the entire Mediterranean coastline, which may not sound like much, but can you imagine all the condos and all the stuff that could have been built on those beaches? No, but seriously, this was when Hazael came in and took all these things, when he took the Mediterranean coast, that meant that all trade would now go through Assyria. Basically, you let Assyria set the market when you let them win that land. Oh, you want stuff that's shipped over here? Well, it's only shipped into my land, right? So he was able to raise the prices on stuff like that. It also gave the Assyrians the ability to build on their navy. They could actually build, a warring front from the water. It gave them that capability. It just gave them all kinds of ways that they could, increase in power and dominate over Israel. And that was Jehu's punishment for some of the stupid things he did in not following God, right? Not to mention all the food source that came from the sea, you'd have to go to buy it in Assyria now because that was part of Assyria. So was there discipline? Absolutely. He lost major portions of that kingdom. And by the end of Jehu's life, as we're winding this down, he's no longer the cool, John Wick figure that's winning everything. He's just kind of he's another failure of a king for Israel that's going away depleted. It's basically what he is. Look at this, 2 Kings 10, starting in verse 34. It says, now the rest of the acts of Jehu and all that he did and all his might, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Jehu slept with his fathers, and they buried him in Samaria, and Jehoahaz, his son, became king in his place. Now, the time which Jehu reigned over Israel in Samaria was 28 years. So, Jehu did have a dynasty. It did last 4 generations. It just wasn't that powerful of a dynasty. God kept his promise, but because of his faithlessness, he lost major portions of that land, and he lost major battles. Okay, so he had to live out the rest of his life instead of being known. Now, remember how full of himself he was getting? He was talking about himself in third person. You know what I mean? He was defeating everybody. He went from that to now he was going to be the lesser king in an area that he used to run. That's what he was going to die known as, the guy who used to run everything. That's why he was going to be known. So here's the thing. Remember, no matter how good you do, it's the motives that matter. And believe me, those motives will be exposed sooner or later. They'll show themselves. And when they do, God can't bless it. And that's what I want to spend some time talking about now, is the application here. And it jumped out to me because when you look at Jehu's life, you have to admit he did accomplish what God asked. He did do that, right? But, there's no debate there, but his motive can certainly be questioned. Because was he really doing what he was doing to glorify God or to glorify himself? And I think all the evidence proves the latter. He was trying to glorify himself. He wanted to be solidified in power. Now, if we're honest, most of us, if we question our motives in our life, if we really evaluate our life, which, by the way, is something Christians don't like to do. Would you admit that? How many Christians say, you know what, I'm going to sit down today and see if there's any areas where I'm a hypocrite? When was the last time you had that conversation with yourself? Christians don't like self-evaluation. We like to evaluate others. We like to look at what everybody else is doing and judge that. We just don't like a lot of judging going on about us, right? But if we're honest, a lot of our motives could be questioned from time to time, even for the things we do that are good, right? The things you're doing, you have to ask yourself, am I doing this to glorify God or to glorify myself, right? I don't know if you remember when you first became a believer, but when I first got saved, I'm not kidding you, I wanted to do anything and everything I could for God. I had this passion, this desire to serve God that was insatiable. I wanted to read his word. I was willing to do anything, take the trash out, anything they asked me to do. I was that nagging young guy saying, what can I do? What can I do? I wanted to do anything God would let me do. Anything that he would make a path for me to do, I wanted to do it. And I just wanted to do it because I was so thankful that he saved me. My motives was I was just thankful for everything that God had done for me. I just wanted to serve him. But over time, it's easy to start drifting away from that spiritual bond you're trying to develop with God and start drifting into religion a little bit. You do things because that's what you're supposed to do. You do things because that's what the elders tell you to do. You do things because it makes you look like you're closer to God. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but there are times where you'll be doing something good, and even in your heart, you feel like a hypocrite doing it because you know your life's not where it should be. Anybody ever been there? And you know, I'm doing these things, and sometimes if your heart's starting to get where it should be again, you almost feel guilty when you're doing it. You're like, I'm doing all these good things if they only knew what I'm struggling with. But there are signs, and I think it's really important we talk about this. There are signs that you may be, drifting off the path a little bit, and that maybe your actions and the things you're doing out of instinct don't line up with your motives, right? And one way to recognize that is frustration. When you start finding frustration in how you're serving God, you need to stop and see why. One thing I tell people when they come to me with a project, and if you came to me with a project, you've heard this, I'm sure, is they always say, well, here's what I think we should do. I go, great, I want you to outline that with all the specifics and bring your plan to me. And they just stare at me. I'm going, you didn't think I was going to do that for you, did you? I mean, you said God put this on your heart. Show me. Write it out in front of me. Bring it to me. Show me your plan. Bring it to me. And then when they bring me their plan, one thing I always tell them is, here's a question you need to ask yourself. Does this mean enough to you to where if nobody helps you and nobody supports you in this, and you get stuck doing this by yourself, and no one gives you any glory for it, will you still do it? And if they say yes, I'll let them do it. But there's a reason I ask those questions, because you start to see people when they get frustrated, their motives start to change. And maybe this has happened to you. I mean, maybe you've become frustrated. Have you ever heard yourself saying things when you're serving God, saying things like, nobody ever helps me with this. Nobody cares about this. Ever hear yourself saying that? Or saying things like, no one is as committed to this as I am. Where you start holding it over other people's heads that you're serving God, that's a problem. That's a problem. That means that your motives might be changing. You're no longer doing it for God, right? And it's not enough to keep you motivated anymore. And here's the thing, is knowing that you're doing the right thing enough? Or does everyone have to see what you're doing and agree with it and give you credit for it's enough? And if that's what it takes for it to be enough, your motives are all wrong, right? I mean, and that can start to happen even in something you're passionate about. Because listen, sometimes God gives you appointments that are on a time limit. You know what I mean? There's sometimes God may have called you to something, and now he may be calling you out. Because if you can't do it with the right heart, it's time to come out. It's time to step out. It's that simple. And here's the thing. Duplicity. If you watch your life for duplicity is probably the biggest thing that will show that you're drifting from God and that maybe you're starting to become religious. And duplicity, basically, trying to make it simple, means that you're developing two different identities pertaining to God, is what duplicity means. Okay, you're developing two different identities. This means that, you have one identity around your friends who are not Christian related, and one identity around your friends who are. And when you find yourself developing two identities, there's a problem. You see what I mean? Because your heart's starting to move away from God. I know that's not going to rub some people the right way, but it's the truth, right? If you have two different languages, you will talk one way around some people and one way around another, something's wrong. Doesn't mean you're not saved. It just means that your heart might be pulling away from God. If you have certain things you will do that you would never admit to someone who is serious about God. You see that? That's maybe you need to start questioning your motives. There's pretty simple signs. There are even Christian people, and I've talked to people about this, who have these enabling Christian friends. So to make them feel good about doing what they're doing, which they know is wrong, they have Christian friends who won't hold them accountable and do the same things. You see what I'm saying? And so they just encourage them to have these two completely separate lives. And it's very important that we take a look at this, because here's the thing. If you have two lives, two vocabularies, listen, don't tell me when you come in here and say, well, I would tell you, but we're in church. I've had people tell me that. I would love to tell you what I told my boss, but we're in church. I'm like, you should be able to tell me what you told your boss, because there shouldn't be another language out there. You know what I mean? Or, well, I've heard people, there's a guy one time, I got to be cautious what I say here, but would go out of town to do all his carousing and drinking and partying because he didn't want to lose his spot in service on Sunday. I'm dead serious, and Here's how he explained it to me one day, and I couldn't believe he told me. It wasn't my church, but he says, well, I just figure as long as they don't know that, it doesn't hurt my testimony, and I'm still good here. I'm going, hypocrite. Sorry, that's something in my throat. You know what I mean? These are things you have to really, really watch out for. Watch for your motives shifting. And deal with it right away. Don't ignore it. There's nothing wrong with God saying, hey, it's time to take a step back. There's nothing wrong with that. It happens to me sometimes. There's things I have to step back from. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself doing it for the wrong reasons, and God can't bless it anyway. You know what I mean? Have you ever met that Christian who is very active, doing good things, but is absolutely miserable? It makes everybody around them miserable. You know what I'm saying? When they have a project going, oh, I don't want to work on that project. That guy hates everybody. You ever meet that person? There was a guy that we were doing some stuff here at the church, and every time I came in to help him, he was complaining about the people who were not there to help him. And I'm going, there's 5 of us here, man. Let's just get this done. Going on and on and on about who didn't show up. And I asked him, I said, well, why did you do this? Well, because I want to make sure, it's better for the church. We have more, we can have more space for people and all that stuff. And I go, okay, we got 5 people here and we're doing it. Why isn't that enough? You see what I mean? It's so easy to be that miserable person because you don't have the right motives anymore. And when you're that person, you need to step back. Because in the end, it ends up just like Jehu. It ends up just like him. In the end of the day, you can say, man, that guy's done a lot of good stuff, but for all the wrong reasons. And no one looks at that as genuine. You mean? And we got to be very cautious not to fall into this rut like Jehu did, where we say, well, I'm doing what God asked me to do, but realistically, God has nothing to do with it. You want credit, you want glory, you want people to recognize what you do, you want people to lift your name up, you want people to respect you. Listen, those are terrible reasons to do anything for God. Here's how you know you're doing what's right for God. If you would do it, if no one asked you to, no one helped you, and no one knew you did it, you have the right motives. Now listen, this sounds strange, but I've actually turned money down because people wanted me to do the big handshake in the paper, holding the check. I said, I'm not going to do that. I said, anything God brings in here, he's going to get the credit for it, nobody else. It's just, the world is pushing us to that, get all the credit you can, and that's what destroyed Jehu, and it will very easily destroy us. So we have to be very, very cautious in our Christian faith to make sure that we only do something as long as we can do it with the right motives, then we get out. And look for something else that God will have us do that we can do with the right motives. That's how you can avoid becoming just like Jehu. But I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll pick up there next week. I'm going to ask if you would please bow your heads. If this is your first time, we always like to give an invitation. And the reason being, we just believe the Word of God touches people's hearts. So if there's someone here who would like me to pray for them while every head is bowed, just make eye contact and you put your head right, bless those people right back down. And I'll pray for you, those of you who are listening, watching. God knows your heart. It's so, so important that we never forget to pray for people who are right on the edge. Just have something holding them back. It's important we pray for those people. But I also say this every week, I want to pray for believers, because if there's ever been a time when our motives need to be right, if there's ever been a time when we serve God just because he's worthy of it, it's now. Because if you want to stand out in a world that's bitter and angry, stand out by standing up for a loving God, and you will see people come to Christ. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for all that you do. And I just thank you that you've made a way for us to have eternal life that is not dependent on us. I'm just so thankful that all we have to do is believe. And your word promises that if we believe that what Jesus did was enough to guarantee our eternal life, that you will grant it to us. Not because we're good enough, not because we make promises to never sin again, just because that's how your grace works. If we want it, you'll give it to us. I thank you for that kind of love. I don't understand it, but I thank you for it. I just thank you that my shortcomings and my sin are not more powerful than your grace. God, if someone makes that decision today, I pray they contact us. But for those of us who are believers, it is so easy to fall into the rut of just playing church. It's so easy to do things because we're supposed to, not because we want to. God, remind each and every one of us who has the promise of eternal life that we have the promise of eternal life. That you've given us a gift that is more valuable than we can ever quantify. And I just pray, God, that out of just gratitude, you light that fire in our hearts again and let us serve you because we want to. Whether anybody notices it or not, whether we get any credit or not, just because it's the right thing to do, give us the heart to serve you with the right motives. And God, we'd ask that you go with us as we leave here and keep us safe. Bless us to live what we profess. Most importantly, God, if you don't return to take us home before we meet again, we just pray that we would come together and give you all the praise, honor, and glory so worthy of at least one more time. We just thank you and we ask these things in Jesus' name.